President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, is at the center of the Ukraine scandal that has launched the impeachment inquiry, and he could potentially face federal charges for his work. The Wall Street Journal is now reporting that under their investigation, federal prosecutors, quote, are examining Giuliani's business dealings in Ukraine, including his finances, meetings, and work for a city mayor there, according to people familiar with the matter. Investigators also have examined Mr. Giuliani's bank records. On Friday, President Trump did not definitively state whether Giuliani was still his lawyer, but he did defend him on Saturday. First, he went on Twitter and wrote, "So now they are after the legendary crime buster and greatest mayor in the history of NYC, Rudy Giuliani. He may seem a little rough around the edges sometimes, but he is also a great guy and wonderful lawyer." The New York Times reports a short while later, Giuliani had lunch with the president at his golf course in Virginia, and then the president gave his strongest praise for Giuliani in an interview with Fox News on Saturday night.
There is some confusion as to whether or not you still consider him your attorney. Is he your attorney?
Yes, and he's a great gentleman. He was a great mayor, one of the greatest, maybe the greatest mayor in the history of New York. He was a fantastic prosecutor. I know nothing about him being under investigation. As somebody said, I heard a report today. I can't imagine it. He's a man that looks for corruption, and whatever he does, I really believe he's I know he's an honorable man.
New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg explored Giuliani's efforts during a recent trip to Ukraine, writing, quote, "Thanks to Giuliani's escapades, the domestic grudges of a crooked Ukrainian prosecutor have blossomed into a scandal that's likely to lead to the impeachment of an American president." And for more, I'm joined by Michelle Goldberg and former federal prosecutor Cynthia Oxney. Thank you both for being here. Michelle, you went to Ukraine and you looked at this. What did you see over there?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to understand that Giuliani was getting a lot of his information from this disgraced prosecutor named Yuri Lutsenko. And Lutsenko is basically feeding Giuliani what he wants to hear. He's since said as much. He's since had to leave Ukraine because he's under criminal investigation. He's also named in that indictment of two of Giuliani's business associates. And he's told reporters from the New York Times that, I've been in politics a long time. I was telling Giuliani, I knew what they wanted to hear. So he thought that what they wanted to hear was that Ukraine intervened in the 2016 election by basically framing Paul Manafort, right? So to believe all of this, you have to believe that Paul Manafort, who is in prison in part because of failing to disclose and pay taxes on this money that he took out of Ukraine, you have to believe that the anti-corruption activists who publicized the fact that Manafort had taken this money, you have to believe that they set all that up in an effort to undermine Trump and that it was somehow false and that Paul Manafort is wrongly accused. I mean, it's just completely preposterous. And so the whole thing has this up is down quality that is sometimes, I think, a little hard to convey because you can't expect Americans to keep all these different Ukrainian characters and kind of internal politics of Ukraine straight. But when you're there, it is just so clear that what Giuliani was doing was basically smearing some of the most devoted anti-corruption figures in Ukraine because of a very corrupt prosecutor who has a grudge against them.
And I'm just curious, how does this story look to folks in Ukraine? Right. What are you hearing from people? Or how does it playing over there?
Well, it's a couple of things. I mean, first of all, they're quite frightened about being dragged into the middle of American domestic politics. They really rely on American support. Several people told me that they felt like they were afraid of being, quote, left alone with Russia. They're currently locked in this proxy war with Russia. And so to have the American president basically turn on them is extremely destabilizing. And there's also, this is a country that has dealt with such a history of corruption. 5 years ago, they had a revolution. Their very corrupt Russian-aligned oligarch fled the country to Russia, and they've tried to transcend a lot of that. And then you have the American president and his lawyer basically demanding that they become more corrupt. And then finally, I think, for the people who've been smeared by Giuliani, it's had real repercussions for them. Again, because America is so important in Ukraine, the relationship with America, to have the lawyer coming out and saying all these terrible things about you, it can kind of reverberate.
Cynthia, speaking of Rudy Giuliani, so there's that new report tonight, this from the Wall Street Journal, that federal prosecutors have looked even at his financial records, his bank records. What could Rudy Giuliani be facing here?
Well, there's just a host of investigations going on. The New York Times has reported this foreign lobbying Registration Act violation that apparently they have been looking into for some time about whether or not he was involved in actually lobbying for this corrupt prosecutor. That's one thing. Another is, was he involved with this frickin' frack who were indicted last week? Was he part of that? And exactly what was his role? And how much money did he get? And what does that mean about conspiracy to commit campaign fine violations? And now we know that they're looking at all his bank or many of his bank records and his business dealings in Ukraine, which could bring up a whole host of other things. So there's really 3 areas of investigation that are going on with him right now. And were I would be concerned that it looks like, A, they're looking at his stuff, B, that it looks like there was some kind of surveillance in the frickin' frack indictment investigation. And you can kind of tell that by looking at it. And C, that either frick or frack might flip on him. So this is a guy with a lot of problems. Oh, and let me give you a quick D. He hasn't been interviewed yet. And what we know about federal investigations, and that's the way we've always done them, is they're sort of like, they are like a swirling tornado, and you go around and round and round and round every way you can before you get to the center and actually interview the subject or the target of the investigation. And that looks pretty much to be where Rudy Giuliani is today.
Well, he has not spoken to federal prosecutors yet, but in terms of offering a defense, the New York Times reports this, quote, Mr. Giuliani said that federal prosecutors had no grounds to charge him with foreign lobbying disclosure violations because he said he was acting on behalf of Mr. Trump. Well, Cynthia, what do you make of that defense? I know you pointed to several possible areas, but in terms of lobbying, he says, look, the president authorized me, deputized me to do this.
They are not mutually exclusive. So he could have foreign lobbying violations, and he could be doing the investigation for the president. What's interesting is the presidential, his comment about the presidential investigation hurts the president. It's just one more piece of proof that they were nosing around improperly in the Ukraine. So he's essentially thrown the president under the bus in that. But don't think you can't do A and B and C. He could have done it all or none of it, and we'll just have to wait and see what there is. But it's not a defense, in other words.
The arc, Michelle, of the Rudy Giuliani public story, I mean, everybody can think back to 2001, 2002, that era, America's mayor. I dug up, there was an NBC poll. His negative rating was 2% back in early 2002. And fast forward 17, 18 years, and this is what we're talking about tonight.
Well, I mean, I think everyone, with very, very few exceptions, everybody who gets involved with Donald Trump disgraces and ruins themselves.
All right, Michelle Goldberg, Cynthia Oxney, thank you both for joining us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.